The Challenger emerges. The sky above New Manhattan burned a sickly orange, choked with ash and the acrid smoke of a world on fire. What was once a gleaming metropolis of hope and human achievement now lay in ruins, its towering skyscrapers reduced to twisted metal and shattered glass. The streets, once teeming with life, were now silent save for the ominous rumble of distant explosions and the haunting whisper of the wind through the wreckage. From this apocalyptic tableau descended a figure that seemed to embody the very essence of destruction. The alien king, a behemoth clad in obsidian armor that seemed to absorb what little light remained, touched down in what was once Central Park. His massive form crushed the scorched earth beneath his feet, leaving deep imprints in the ground with each thunderous step. The king's eyes, glowing in eerie purple, scanned the desolation around him. His lips curled into a sneer of contempt as he took in the remnants of humanity's last stand. With a voice that resonated like rolling thunder, he issued his challenge to the scattered survivors hiding in the shadows of their broken world. "Humans," he bellowed, the sound echoing off the ruined buildings. "Your pathetic resistance ends here. Bring forth your mightiest warrior, your last hope. Let this final duel decide the fate of your miserable species." For a long moment, only silence answered him. Then, from the rubble of what was once a proud skyscraper, a lone figure emerged. He moved with a quiet grace that belied the harshness of his surroundings, each step deliberate and measured. Captain David Reed, veteran of 100 battles against the alien invaders, stood before the king. His lean frame was a stark contrast to the alien's massive bulk, but there was no fear in his eyes, only a cold, calculating determination. Reed's battle-worn armor bore the scars of countless engagements, a testament to his survival against impossible odds. The king's laughter boomed across the devastated landscape. This is what your species offers as its champion. A broken man clinging to his final breaths. He shook his head, amusement and disdain mooring in his expression. "I expected more from a race that has resisted us for so long." Reed's face remained impassive, his eyes never leaving the alien king. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, carrying an undercurrent of steel. "You wanted humanity's best. Here I am." He rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck with a casual air that seemed almost insolent. "Let's see if you're ready for what that means." The king's amusement faded, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. With a roar that shook the very ground, he surged forward, a blur of mass and power. His first strike was a hammer blow, meant to end the fight in an instant. But Reed was already moving. With fluid precision, he ducked low, sidestepping the king's massive fist. The wind from the blow whipped against his face as the alien's attack crashed into the ground, sending debris flying in all directions. "Fast, for a dying breed," the king snarled, his eyes narrowing as he reassessed his opponent. Reed didn't respond with words. Instead, he countered, driving his elbow into the alien's armored ribs with a calculated strike. The king barely flinched, but Reed's intention wasn't to overpower him. It was to probe, to analyze the gaps in his defenses. As the battle raged on, every movement Reed made was deliberate. Each dodge, each counter was an attempt to gather intelligence. He wasn't just fighting. He was learning, adapting with every passing second. The king's strikes became more furious, his frustration evident in the increasing ferocity of his attacks. He was used to overwhelming his opponents with sheer force, but Reed was different. The human was a ghost, slipping through each assault, testing weaknesses, and chipping away at the king's patience. "Fight me like a warrior," the king roared, swinging wide again. Reed ducked, a narrow dodge that put him inches away from a crushing blow. His eyes were cold and calculating as he muttered under his breath, "You're predictable." For the first time, the king's arrogance faltered. He had dismissed this human as just another primitive creature, yet here Reed stood, unbroken, unfazed, and unsettlingly composed. What the king saw now wasn't mere defiance. It was confidence, a subtle, simmering confidence that belied something far more dangerous than strength: cunning. "You're not the first to think you're invincible," Reed said, his voice calm despite the intensity of the battle. "You won't be the last to find out you're wrong." A flicker of doubt crossed the king's eyes, but it was brief. With a thunderous growl, he prepared for another all-out assault, determined to crush this insolent human once and for all. As the two circled each other, the atmosphere shifted. The scattered human survivors, watching from their hiding places, felt a change in the air. This duel was no longer just a test of strength. It had become a battle of wits, and the king was starting to realize he might have underestimated his opponent. Reed's lips curled into a faint smirk as he tightened his grip on the knife at his side. The king might have had the strength, but Reed had something far more valuable: a plan. The alien king's rage rippled through the air like thunder. He bared his teeth, the glint of serrated fangs catching the fading sunlight. This time, there would be no holding back. He was done toying with this human, done with the calculated jabs that had eroded his pride. With a snarl that sent tremors through the ground, the king launched himself forward. His fists crackled with energy that surged through the fractured concrete beneath them, leaving scorched trails in his wake. Reed shifted his weight, tracking the king's movements with the precision of a sniper. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to put distance between himself and the oncoming juggernaut. But he held his ground, eyes sharp as steel, every muscle in his body coiled and ready to spring at the slightest opening. The king was fast, inhumanly so, but Reed had learned that brute force had its limits. He had studied the patterns, memorized the gaps in those sweeping arcs. This wasn't a mindless beast he was facing, but a warrior bound by arrogance and tradition. The ground exploded as the king's fist met empty space, a crater forming where Reed had been just a heartbeat before. The human warrior rolled smoothly to the side, his movements fluid and economical. Not a single motion was wasted. The king spun, lashing out with a backhand that cut through the air with a deafening crack. Reed ducked, feeling the wind shear past his scalp. But this time, he struck back hard. His knife flashed in the dim light, finding a gap in the king's armor and embedding itself just beneath the shoulder joint. A roar of pain and fury erupted from the alien monarch. He staggered back a step, black blood oozing from the wound. For the first time since the battle began, the king had been hurt. Reed didn't waste a second. He withdrew the blade and pivoted, aiming a swift kick at the king's knee. The joint buckled slightly, forcing the towering alien to brace himself. The king's eyes blazed with renewed hatred, and in that moment, Reed knew he had struck more than flesh. He had pierced the king's belief in his own invincibility. "You think your tricks will save you, human?" The king spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I've raised worlds, shattered empires. You're nothing but a pest, delaying the inevitable." Reed's expression remained calm, though his breathing grew more labored. "I've heard a lot of talk from dead men," he replied coolly. "You'll fit right in." There was no time to register the insult. The king surged forward, abandoning finesse for sheer ferocity. The blows came faster now, relentless and devastating. Reed dodged and deflected as best he could, but the pressure was mounting. One misstep, and it would all be over. Sweat slicked Reed's brow as he danced along the edge of disaster. Every movement was calculated to stay just one step ahead, but it was more than just survival. Reed's mind was racing, analyzing the rhythm of the fight, the king's tendency to favor his right side, the micro-delays before each strike. He wasn't just enduring. He was learning, adapting with every passing second. And as the battle raged on, a plan began to form in his mind. The king's attacks grew wilder, more desperate. He could feel the tide of the battle shifting, even if he couldn't understand how. This human, this insignificant creature, was not just surviving. He was fighting back. Reed saw his opening. As the king overextended on a particularly vicious swing, the human warrior ducked under the blow and drove his fist into the alien's solar plexus. It was like punching a wall, but the impact sent shockwaves through the king's massive frame. For a moment, the alien stumbled, his rhythm broken. Reed pressed his advantage, landing a flurry of strikes on the king's joints and weak points. Each blow was precisely targeted, the culmination of everything he had learned throughout the fight. The king roared in frustration, lashing out with a wild backhand that caught Reed across the chest. The human was sent flying, crashing into a pile of rubble with bone-jarring force. Pain exploded through his body, but Reed forced himself to his feet, refusing to stay down. "Why won't you die?" the king bellowed, his composure cracking. "What are you?" Reed spat blood, his eyes never leaving his opponent. "I'm human," he said simply. "And that's something you'll never understand." The battle had reached a turning point. The king's invincibility was shattered, his confidence replaced by a growing fear. This human, this David Reed, was more than just a warrior. He was the embodiment of humanity's resilience, their refusal to submit even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the two combatants faced each other once more, the air crackled with tension. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and Captain David Reed stood as the last line of defense against an alien force that had nearly conquered the Earth. The king's eyes narrowed, a mix of hatred and grudging respect in his gaze. He had underestimated this human, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the ruined city, he charged forward, determined to end this fight once and for all. Reed stood his ground, battered but unbroken. In his eyes burned the indomitable spirit of humanity, a fire that had carried his species through countless trials and tribulations. As the alien king bore down on him, Reed knew that this was more than just a battle between two warriors. It was a clash of wills, a test of the very essence of what it meant to be human. With steely determination, Reed prepared to meet the king's charge. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the entire galaxy, would be decided in the moments to come. And as the two titans clashed once more, the scattered survivors watched with bated breath, hope rekindling in their hearts for the first time since the invasion began. The battle for humanity's future had only just begun. The tides of battle. The alien king's charge was like a meteor strike, his massive form hurtling towards Reed with unstoppable momentum. The ground trembled beneath his feet, cracks spiderwebbing outward with each thunderous step. But Reed stood his ground, his stance solid, his eyes locked on his approaching foe. At the last possible moment, Reed moved. It wasn't a dodge or a retreat, but a calculated step to the side, just enough to avoid the brunt of the king's charge while positioning himself for a counterattack. As the king barreled past, Reed's hand shot out, grabbing onto a protruding piece of the alien's armor. Using the king's own momentum, Reed swung himself around, landing on the alien's back. Before the king could react, Reed had his knife out, driving it deep into a gap between the armor plates at the base of the alien's neck. The king roared in pain and fury, reaching back to swat at Reed like an annoying insect. But the human was already moving, leaping clear and rolling to his feet a short distance away. "First blood," Reed muttered, his eyes never leaving the king. "Let's see how you handle it." The king's eyes blazed with murderous intent. "You dare," he snarled, black blood oozing from the wound. "I will crush you, human. I will grind your bones to dust." Reed's expression remained impassive. Big words. Let's see some action. With a bellow that shook the ruins around them, the king unleashed a barrage of energy blasts from his gauntlets. The air crackled with power as bolts of searing energy streaked towards Reed. But the human was already moving, his agility and reflexes honed by years of combat. He weaved through the deadly light show, each near miss singing his armor, but never quite finding its mark. As he dodged, Reed's mind raced, analyzing the pattern of the attacks. There was a rhythm to it, a predictability born of the king's rage. And in that predictability, Reed saw opportunity. He changed direction suddenly, charging straight at the king. The alien's eyes widened in surprise, his barrage faltering for just a moment. It was all the opening Reed needed. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, ducking under a wild swing from the king and driving his shoulder into the alien's midsection. It was like hitting a wall of steel, but Reed's momentum was enough to stagger the larger opponent. Reed followed up with a series of quick strikes, targeting the joints and weak points in the king's armor. Each blow was precisely aimed, the product of careful observation and tactical analysis. The king stumbled back, caught off guard by the sudden assault. For the first time since the battle began, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. This human was not just surviving. He was fighting back, and fighting smart. How? The king growled, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. How are you doing this? Reed allowed himself a grim smile. You're not the first tyrant I've faced. Won't be the last. The king's response was a roar of pure rage. He charged again, but this time his movements were wilder, less controlled. Reed saw the change and adjusted his strategy accordingly. Instead of dodging, he met the king's charge head-on. At the last moment, he dropped low, using the alien's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The king crashed to the ground with earth-shaking force, leaving a small crater in the ruined street. Before the alien could recover, Reed was on him, raining down blows on the vulnerable spots he'd identified earlier. Each strike was calculated, designed to cause maximum damage while conserving his own energy. The king thrashed wildly, his massive arms sweeping out in an attempt to dislodge the human. But Reed moved with the blows, using the king's own strength against him. As the battle raged on, the scattered human survivors watching from the shadows began to feel something they hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. This lone warrior, this Captain David Reed, was holding his own against the alien monarch who had brought their world to its knees. The king finally managed to throw Reed off, sending him tumbling across the rubble-strewn ground. But Reed rolled with the impact, coming up in a defensive stance, ready for the next assault. The alien monarch rose to his feet, his armor dented and scratched, black blood seeping from multiple wounds. His eyes blazed with a mixture of fury and grudging respect. "You fight well, human," the king admitted, his voice a low growl. "But it won't be enough. I am the conqueror of 1,000 worlds. I will not be defeated by a primitive creature like you." Reed's response was calm, almost casual. 1,000 worlds, huh? Funny. I don't remember asking. The king's eyes narrowed. "You mock me?" "No," Reed replied, his voice hardening. "I'm just reminding you that this isn't about your past conquests. This is about here and now. This is about Earth." With that, Reed launched himself forward, initiating the attack for the first time since the battle began. The king, caught off guard by the sudden aggression, found himself on the defensive. Reed's strikes came in a flurry, each one precisely aimed and timed. He moved like water, flowing around the king's counterattacks and finding openings where none seemed to exist. The alien monarch's superior strength and durability kept him in the fight, but for the first time, he found himself truly challenged. This human wasn't just surviving. He was pushing back, forcing the king to adapt and evolve his tactics. As the battle raged on, the ruins of New Manhattan bore witness to a clash of titans. The ground shook with each exchange, the air crackling with energy from the king's attacks and the sheer intensity of the combat. Reed took hits, each one feeling like it might be his last. But he refused to stay down, refused to give in to the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. With each blow he endured, he struck back harder, driven by the knowledge that he was Earth's last hope. The king, for his part, found himself in unfamiliar territory. Never before had he faced an opponent who could match him like this. The human's resilience and adaptability were unlike anything he had encountered in his conquests across the galaxy. As the battle reached a fever pitch, Reed saw an opening. The king, frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, overextended on a powerful swing. Reed ducked under the attack and drove his knife deep into the alien's side. finding a gap in the armor that he had identified earlier. The king roared in pain and fury, staggering back, but Reed pressed his advantage, following up with a series of quick strikes that kept the alien off balance. For a moment, it seemed like the tide had truly turned. Reed had the king on the defensive, each blow driving the alien monarch back step by step. But the king was far from defeated. With a bellow that shook the very foundations of the ruined city, he unleashed a massive surge of energy from his armor. The blast caught Reed square in the chest, sending him flying back to crash into a partially collapsed building. Pain exploded through Reed's body as he hit the wall of rubble. For a moment, his vision swam, the world around him blurring into a haze of pain and disorientation. The king advanced slowly, his massive form silhouetted against the ash-filled sky. "It's over, human," he growled, raising his fist for a final, crushing blow. "You fought well, but in the end, you're just another conquered species." Reed struggled to his feet, his body screaming in protest. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye, and he could feel at least 2 broken ribs. But as he looked up at the approaching alien monarch, there was no fear in his eyes, only determination. "You're right about one thing," Reed said, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "It is over, but not for humanity." With that, Reed reached behind his back and pulled out a device that he had kept hidden throughout the battle. It was small, roughly the size of his palm, but it glowed with an intense energy that made the king pause in his advance. "What is that?" the alien monarch demanded, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. Reed's lips curled into a grim smile. This is humanity's little surprise. You see, while you were busy conquering worlds, we were busy learning, and we learned a lot from your technology." The device in Reed's hand pulsed with power, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. The king took a step back, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and growing fear. "Impossible," he breathed. "You couldn't have reverse-engineered your own weapons." Reed finished for him. "Like I said, you underestimated us. Big mistake." As the alien king stood frozen in shock, Reed activated the device. A wave of energy pulsed outward, washing over both combatants. The king's armor began to spark and malfunction, its advanced systems disrupted by the human-made device. Reed stood tall, battered but unbroken, holding the key to humanity's survival in his hand. The battle was far from over. But in that moment, the balance of power had shifted. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and Captain David Reed was ready to fight to his last breath to ensure humanity's survival. As he faced the stunned alien king, Reed knew that the real battle was only just beginning. The turning point. The alien king stumbled back, his once imposing armor now crackling with erratic energy. Sparks flew from joints and seams, the advanced technology that had made him nearly invincible now working against him. His eyes, once filled with contempt and arrogance, now showed a flicker of something new. Fear. Reed stood his ground, the device in his hand still pulsing with energy. Despite his injuries, he managed to straighten up, his posture radiating defiance. "Not so invincible now, are you?" he said, his voice low but carrying across the battlefield. The king snarled, a sound more animal than sentient. "What have you done, human?" he demanded, trying to regain control of his malfunctioning systems. "Like I said," Reed replied, taking a step forward, "we learned. Every time you attacked, every ship we brought down, every piece of tech we salvaged, we studied it all. And we found your weakness." The king's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. Our technology is beyond your primitive understanding." Reed allowed himself a grim smile. "You'd be surprised what humans can do when our backs are against the wall. We're resourceful, adaptable, and above all, we don't give up." With a roar of frustration, the king charged forward, abandoning finesse for brute force. But his movements were sluggish, hampered by his malfunctioning armor. Reed sidestepped the attack with ease, using the king's own momentum to send him crashing into a pile of rubble. As the alien monarch struggled to his feet, Reed pressed his advantage. He moved in close, targeting the weak points he'd identified earlier. Each strike was precise, calculated to cause maximum damage while conserving his own dwindling energy. The king lashed out wildly, his once deadly blows now easily avoided. Reed ducked and weaved, his movements fluid despite his injuries. He was operating on pure adrenaline now, driven by the knowledge that this might be humanity's last chance. "You can't win," the king growled, his voice a mixture of rage and desperation. "Even if you defeat me, our armada will reduce this planet to ash." Reed's response was a swift kick to the king's knee, causing the alien to stumble. "Maybe," he said, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "But they'll do it without their leader. And trust me, we got a few more surprises waiting for them." The battle raged on, the ruins of New Manhattan bearing witness to a clash that would determine the fate of humanity. The scattered survivors watched in awe as their champion, bloody but unbowed, stood toe-to-toe with the alien monarch who had brought their world to its knees. As the fight continued, Reed began to notice something. The king's attacks, while still powerful, were becoming more predictable. The alien was falling back on basic combat patterns, his advanced training hampered by his malfunctioning armor and growing fatigue. Reed saw his opportunity. Feinting to the left, he suddenly changed direction, driving his shoulder into the king's midsection. The alien, caught off guard, toppled backward, crashing to the ground with earth-shaking force. Before the king could recover, Reed was on him. He drove his knee into the alien's chest, pinning him down. With his free hand, he raised his knife, the blade poised over a gap in the king's armor. "It's over," Reed said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Surrender, and I'll spare your life." The king's eyes blazed with hatred, but there was something else there too, a grudging respect. "You've won the battle, human," he spat. "But the war's far from over." Reed pressed the knife closer, its tip just barely piercing the alien's skin. "Maybe. But right now, I'm more concerned with you calling off your forces. Order them to stand down." For a long moment, the king was silent, his alien features unreadable. Then, slowly he nodded. "Very well. I will give the order." Reed eased back slightly, but kept the knife ready. "Do it. Now." The king raised his hand to his helmet, activating a communication device. He spoke in a series of harsh, guttural sounds, his native language, Reed assumed. After a few moments, he lowered his hand. "It is done," the king said. "I have ordered all forces to cease fire and await further instructions." Reed's eyes narrowed. "And why should I believe you?" The king's laugh was bitter. "Because, human, you have earned my respect. In all my conquests across the galaxy, I have never encountered a species quite like yours. Your resilience, your adaptability, it is remarkable." Reed stood slowly, his muscles screaming in protest. He kept the knife ready, unwilling to let his guard down completely. "Flattery won't save your invasion," he said. The king struggled to a sitting position, his once mighty frame now battered and broken. "Perhaps not. But it may save your species. You have proven yourselves worthy adversaries. Perhaps there is more to be gained from alliance than conquest." Reed's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Alliance? You can't be serious." The king's eyes met Reed's, and for the first time, there was no hostility in them. "I am always serious, human. Your species has potential that I had not foreseen. With our technology and your unique qualities, we could forge an empire unlike any the galaxy has ever seen." For a moment, Reed was tempted. The prospect of advanced alien technology, of humanity taking its place among the stars, was alluring. But then he remembered the devastation around him, the lives lost, the world brought to the brink of destruction. "No," he said firmly. "We're not interested in empires or conquests. We just want our planet back. We want peace." The king nodded slowly. Peace, a concept my people have not considered in millennia. Perhaps it is time we relearned it. As if on cue, the sound of engines filled the air. Reed looked up to see human aircraft approaching. Fighters and transports, bearing the insignia of Earth's United Defense Forces. Looks like the cavalry's finally arrived, Reed muttered, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over him. As the aircraft landed and soldiers poured out, surrounding them with weapons raised, Reed realized that this was just the beginning. The immediate threat might be over, but the real work, rebuilding, establishing a new relationship with an alien race, ensuring Earth's safety in a suddenly much larger universe, was just beginning. He looked down at the alien king, who was now being secured by human soldiers. I hope you meant what you said about peace, Reed said. Because if you didn't, if this is some kind of trick, well, you've seen what we're capable of when we're backed into a corner. Imagine what we can do with time to prepare. The king met his gaze steadily. No tricks, human. You have earned my respect, and the respect of my people. Whatever comes next, let it be built on that foundation. As medical personnel rushed to tend to his injuries, Reed allowed himself to finally relax. The battle was over. Against all odds, humanity had prevailed. But as he watched the sun begin to rise over the ruins of New Manhattan, casting its light on a world forever changed, Reed knew that the real challenge was just beginning. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. Now they had to decide what to do with it. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was filled with hope. And for Captain David Reed, hero of Earth, that was enough. For now. The days following the battle were a blur of activity. As news of the alien king's defeat spread across the globe, the remnants of humanity emerged from their hiding places, daring to hope for the first time in years. The skies, once filled with the ominous shapes of alien warships, now buzzed with Earth's own aircraft, coordinating relief efforts and beginning the monumental task of rebuilding. Captain David Reed found himself at the center of it all, hailed as a hero and thrust into a role he had never anticipated. As he stood on the makeshift stage erected in the heart of what was once Central Park, he could still hardly believe the turn of events. People of Earth, he began, his voice carried across the gathered crowd and broadcast to billions around the world. We've won a great victory, but our work is far from over. The road ahead is long and challenging, but together, we can rebuild. We can create a world even stronger than the one we lost. As Reed spoke, his eyes scanned the crowd. He saw faces etched with hardship and loss, but also glimmering with hope. In the front row, a group of children gazed up at him with awe, too young to remember a world before the invasion. It was for them, Reed realized, that the real fight was just beginning. We've been offered a chance at peace, at alliance with a species we once thought of only as enemies, Reed continued. It won't be easy. There's hurt and mistrust on both sides. But if we can overcome that, if we can forge a new path forward together, the possibilities are endless. As he finished his speech, the crowd erupted in cheers. Reed stepped down from the stage, immediately surrounded by advisors and officials all clamoring for his attention. But his focus was drawn to a figure standing at the edge of the gathering. The alien king, now stripped of his armor and looking almost vulnerable in simple clothing. Reed made his way over, the crowd parting before him. As he approached, the king inclined his head in a gesture of respect. Your words were inspiring, Captain Reed. The king said, his voice lacking its former arrogance. I begin to understand why my people found your species so challenging to conquer. Reed's expression remained neutral. I meant what I said. This is a chance for both our peoples. But make no mistake, if this is some kind of ploy, if you betray us. The king held up a hand. No ploys, no betrayals. You have shown us a different way, a strength we have forgotten. My people, we have been conquerors for so long, we had forgotten how to be anything else. Perhaps it is time we remembered. As they talked, Reed couldn't help but marvel at the surreal nature of the situation. Just days ago, they had been locked in mortal combat. Now they were discussing the future of two species, the potential for a partnership that could reshape the galaxy. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Emily Chen, the brilliant scientist who had reverse-engineered the alien technology that had turned the tide of the battle. Her eyes were bright with excitement as she approached. "Captain Reed, Your Highness," she greeted them, barely containing her enthusiasm. "We've made a breakthrough. The alien ship you disabled during the battle. We've managed to access its database. The amount of knowledge, the advancements in science and technology. It's beyond anything we could have imagined." The king's eyes widened in surprise. "You've decrypted our system so quickly. Impressive." Dr. Chen nodded, her expression a mix of pride and determination. "This is just the beginning. With your cooperation, we could make advancements that would benefit both our species. Medical breakthroughs, clean energy, space travel. The possibilities are endless." As Reed listened to Dr. Chen outline the potential future, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was what he had fought for, not just survival, but the chance for humanity to grow, to reach its full potential. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The world began to heal, cities rising from the ashes, stronger and more advanced than before. The alien technology, combined with human ingenuity, led to breakthroughs that transformed every aspect of life on Earth. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were setbacks, conflicts, moments when the fragile peace seemed on the verge of shattering. Reed found himself playing the role of diplomat, as much as soldier, mediating disputes between humans and aliens, working tirelessly to build trust and understanding. 1 year after the battle that had changed everything, Reed stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, the first joint human-alien space station orbiting Earth. As he looked down at the blue-green marble of his home planet, he reflected on how far they had come, and how far they still had to go. "Quite a view, isn't it?" a familiar voice said behind him. Reed turned to see the alien king, or former king, as he now preferred to be called, joining him at the window. Reed nodded. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real, that we made it this far." The alien's expression was thoughtful. "Your people continue to surprise me, Captain Reed. Your resilience, your creativity, your capacity for forgiveness. These are qualities my people had forgotten. We have much to learn from each other." As they stood there, looking out at the vast expanse of space, Reed felt a sense of anticipation. The galaxy was opening up before them, filled with wonders and challenges they had yet to imagine. Whatever came next, humanity would face it not as conquerors or victims, but as explorers and allies. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was bright with promise. And for Captain David Reed, hero of Earth and architect of a new era, that was more than enough. Beyond the horizon, 5 years had passed since the day humanity turned the tide against the alien invasion. The Earth, once ravaged by war, now pulsed with new life and energy. Cities gleamed with a blend of human and alien architecture, while in the skies, ships of both species soared peacefully side by side. Captain David Reed, now Admiral Reed, stood at the helm of the U.S. Hope, Earth's first deep space exploration vessel. The ship was a marvel of joint human-alien engineering, capable of speeds that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. As the Hope prepared for its maiden voyage, Reed couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. The challenges had been immense, overcoming centuries of alien conquest mentality, quelling human fears and mistrust, and forging a genuine alliance between two vastly different species. "Admiral," a voice called, interrupting his thoughts. Reed turned to see his first officer, Commander Zara, approaching. Half human and half alien, Zara represented the new generation born of the Alliance, a living symbol of what they had achieved. "Yes, Commander," Reed responded, noting the excitement in her eyes. "Final checks are complete, sir. We're ready for launch." Reed nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Very well. Let's make history." As the crew took their positions, Reed activated the ship-wide communication system. "Attention all hands. This is Admiral Reed speaking. In a few moments, we'll be embarking on humanity's first mission of deep space exploration. Our journey will take us further than any human has ever traveled before." He paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. 5 years ago, we fought for our very survival. Today, we set out not as conquerors, not as victims, but as explorers. We carry with us the hopes and dreams of two species, united in our quest for knowledge and understanding. The ship hummed to life around them, the advanced propulsion systems powering up. Through the view screen, Reed could see the Earth slowly receding, a beautiful blue marble suspended in the vastness of space. "Whatever we find out there," Reed continued, "whatever challenges we face them together. Human and alien, united in purpose and spirit. Let's show the universe what we can achieve." As he finished speaking, a cheer went up from the crew. Reed felt a swell of pride as he looked at the faces around him. Human, alien, and those like Zara who were both. This was what he had fought for, what so many had sacrificed for. Not just survival, but the chance to thrive, to grow, to explore. The former alien king, now serving as an ambassador and advisor, stepped up beside Reed. "You've come a long way from that battlefield in New Manhattan, my friend," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and wonder. Reed nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "We all have. But this is just the beginning." With a word from Reed, the Hope engaged its faster-than-light drive. In a brilliant flash of light, the ship leaped forward, leaving the solar system behind and plunging into the unknown. As they traveled further than any human had ever gone before, Reed felt a sense of anticipation and wonder. The universe stretched out before them, vast and mysterious, filled with potential allies, challenges, and discoveries beyond imagination. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks, dangers, moments of doubt. But as Reed looked at his crew, this family forged in the crucible of conflict and cooperation, he knew that together they could face anything the cosmos threw at them. Humanity had survived its trial by fire. They had faced extinction and emerged stronger, wiser, united with their former enemies in a common cause. Now, as they took their first steps into the galactic community, they carried with them a message of resilience, adaptability, and hope. As the Hope soared through the stars, Admiral David Reed allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. They had not just saved humanity. They had given it a future brighter than anyone could have imagined. The story of humanity's struggle and triumph would be told throughout the galaxy for generations to come. But for Reed and his crew, the greatest chapters were yet to be written. With the stars as their map and unity as their strength, they set out to write the next great chapter in the human story. As the ship disappeared into the depths of space, Earth continued its own journey of growth and healing. The alliance between humans and aliens grew stronger with each passing day, transforming both societies in ways that would have once seemed impossible. And somewhere out there, among the countless stars and swirling galaxies, the U.S. Hope carried the dreams of two species, once enemies, now united in their quest for knowledge and understanding. The future was uncertain, but it was filled with possibilities, and that was the greatest victory of all.